So today's guest needs no introduction. If you've not heard of him, read his magazine articles or his tweets, you've been hiding in a very dark cupboard somewhere. You need to get out a bit more. Martin Fullard is the editor of Conference News, one of MASH media industry publications. MASH own Confex, which is a couple of weeks' time, 22nd and 23rd of June, XR. There's a massive influx of event profs going along there to see what's being talked about and discussed, and getting to see each other face to face, which is very exciting. I have to say, in my point of view, but I know many others as well, Martin is one of the sharpest and knowledgeable individuals in the industry. He's been very vocal about getting back to live, been on numerous TV and radio shows, banging the drum for the industry. As G7 kicks off today, Martin has attended many of the governmental trial events. Question for you, Martin, are you speaking from Cornwall today?
Sadly not, no. I'm in my village on the Surrey-West Sussex border.
I just imagine
Boris did invite me to join him on his private plane, but maybe that invite didn't get to me, I don't know.
Okay, I thought you might have been there. It would have been great to be in attendance. But the objective today and the objective of the discussion is for corporate members to get an understanding of what you've been seeing, feeling at the expos, the public events, the association trials that you've attended, to help them with their planning and returning to live. And guys, I say to everyone, this is it's a small group. We should have about 20 people. It's an open discussion, so please feel free to jump in either with a question or to drop something into the chat, which I'll put to Martin. But yeah, very much an open roundtable forum. So to kick it off, Martin, give us a quick top line. Let's go back nearly 18 months of how you observed it, what you thought was happening, what you could see, how the industry reacted, and where we are now.
Where we are, well, it's quite remarkable that where we are now is technically not in that much of a different situation to where we were in March of last year. Although we are allowed to run restricted capacity events now, there's a great sense of anxiety around it. I think in those formative months, everyone was like, let's get back to live, let's get back to live. There wasn't really a fear or an anxiety about it. It was just let's get back. But I think that sort of anxiety has crept up. And I think it still does exist in large quarters. Certainly that comes across in the press. But, we've all been through the last 16 or so months together. We know that it's been an incredibly difficult time for the events industry. And I think that what it's done is highlight our problems. And I think there are positives and upsides to this. There are positives and downsides to it, rather. Obviously, we've lost businesses along the way, and individuals will no doubt have been through an absolutely appalling time. Some have lost businesses, some have lost their jobs and their livelihoods. In some cases, it would have been worse, and lost their homes, and that they can't be forgotten easily. They've been part of our journey. But on the same token, as an industry, we were I'm going to use the word fat and perhaps a little bit unknown. We didn't really know who we were. And I know Richard will talk about this in a bit more detail in a few moments, but the events industry itself as an entity doesn't really exist. It never sort of has. And I know we were talking about this earlier, but there's obviously this thing around the sick codes, and that's been on the agenda for a long time. For a decade, long before I came into this industry, but it never really mattered too much until the one time when the government needed to look at what sectors needed saving, and the only resource it could possibly use would be companies' house data with the ONS. So just a quick top line on that. There are 752 sick codes. When you register a business, you have to choose at least one. I think you're allowed up to a maximum of 4. Of those codes, only 3 relate to the events industry in any way. Conference organizer, exhibition organizer, and event catering. And they're spread out in different places among a general service bracket. So they're not in an events category. And I did an investigative feature last year. I plucked 200 events businesses out of thin air, a mixture of venues and agencies and suppliers and contractors who are known to me. And only 20 or 30, somewhere in that bracket out of the 200, were using one of those 3 available SIC codes. And now we're in a chicken and egg situation. Those codes are ineffective. They don't really mean anything to us, so why would you use them? But they are the only way that the government can accurately see what size the events industry actually is. All these other businesses were just registered elsewhere. Many agencies were registered as a perhaps PR and communications business or an advertising business. Hotels are obviously registered as hotels. So they're in the sort of hospitality economy guidance over on the other sector. All the events revenue, for example, goes into other sectors, and it's a complete mishmash. And it took the industry a good couple of months to sort of just work out who each other were before we could actually do anything. And I don't envy the position the associations found themselves in, trying to explain to government how big and diverse we were as a sector, but unable to actually point to any tangible black and white evidence to back that up. And that's where we found ourselves. And certainly, I know we'll talk about this later, that's what we need to establish. So that's the marketplace. And of course, I'm obviously conscious that corporates working for other sectors won't be directly impacted by that because they'll work for sectors that technically exist. But for the industry that supports them, it's been a very bad time.
Yeah, and I know in my role representing EMA on the BVEP board, we've been very much involved with that, talking to the DCMS and everything else and trying to communicate how big the sector is. And of course, when we looked at our members, if you work for ABC Bank, you come under finance. You're not in events. So how many people are employed in the sector is very tricky, very well, nigh on impossible to do to create something. But yes, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do that and track that. And I know that Caroline Jackson is working on the SIC codes as we speak. They've allowed us a window to put some more stuff in there. But I know that, one of the big things now, as we're seeing coming back to live, is what I'm seeing is the supply chain missing a lot of people, basic people, from the technicians, the production guys, the chefs for the catering, the chambermaids in the hotels and stuff like that. Any thoughts and ideas of when that's going to get back to recovery?
Yeah, I think it was one of those sort of slow victims. I think we all sort of knew within the first month or so after this kicked off that the supply chain was going to be severely impacted unless a targeted support campaign was forthcoming. And of course, no targeted support campaign was forthcoming at all. So it's sort of been a very slow and painful race to the bottom there. Many businesses have gone under, but the ones who have survived, the phones are ringing for them now. It's great. At Mash Media, we're getting phone calls from these guys all the time. Some have even got enough resource to actually, place a few adverts, which is great news. Nothing compared to normal times, but we're on the way up. But like you correctly point out, who's actually going to be helping support them? At the moment, some of these guys are taking on more jobs than they can deliver, and they're just relying on a very diverse freelance model. I was going to use the words a scattered freelance model, because people are taking whatever jobs they can find without actually saying, oh, can I handle that? Yeah, well, I'll just do that. I'll get the money and we'll work out how we deal with that later. It's been a very hard time, but I don't think that will endure for much longer, or rather it won't endure beyond once we're sort of fully reopened. I think then that stability will allow people, or give people the confidence to maybe absorb those overheads once more, to bring on, expand their teams. But I think the freelance model is going to be a big part of the remainder of 2021. But again, I would just hope that those freelancers have been staying on top of things as best as they can in terms of upskilling, making sure that they're aware of, the needs of the contemporary event professional and the needs of the corporate, because, we're all talking now about virtual events, and let's be honest, they're not going anywhere. They're an important part. And the production of our online events and hybrid events, as I'm sure all of you guys here today will appreciate, needs to be of TV quality. We can't service our clients with amateur hour. So you're going to need the best freelancers. So if you're a freelancer of the old school and things were always done a certain way, that's fine. Those skills will still be needed, but you need to understand client expectations today. So my hope is that these suppliers are on top of that they are aware of the client expectations of high broadcast quality and high audience engagement quality.
Yeah, and I think I'm to close off on that. I think it's really important for our members, the guys on the call, to understand the impact on going back to live events on, and making sure that your supply base has got that support infrastructure in place, commitment. And just to share, guys, I was at a MiceBook event. Priya was there. Christopher, you were there as well. I was talking to some hoteliers there, which were 5-star quality establishments with sort of the country house properties and stuff. And they basically saying, we are already full, with tourism and stuff like that. But we're only running at 50% capacity because we cannot get the support staff. So I'm not talking about, management and stuff like that, but literally chambermaids, kitchen porters, people that are behind the scenes doing a lot of the heavy lifting on these venues, properties, suppliers, because all the staff kind of were on part-time contracts for, hourly contract. They all left the country and went back to their homes because they couldn't afford to live here in an unsure situation. I'm going to guess that's the same as for the Aussies, the New Zealanders, the Americans, anyone that was over here, on their 2-year work visas for a bit of holiday and fun.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think that obviously, we haven't mentioned the B word, but the Brexit impact will have some bearing on that as well.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're still, and it obviously does sound hard to believe, we're still in the pandemic situation. We're not unlocked. We don't know really where the landscape's going to go with any certain accuracy. The industry will find its head. Those jobs will be filled eventually, but how? The dynamic is going to change. But we're just right now still in that. If I was running a company right now, I'd be nervous about bringing on new staff because I just don't know what's around the corner.
Yeah, I can see quite a few jobs being added. It's great. So tell us a little bit about the couple of events that you've been involved with, that you've been along as participant and a reporter, and how you see the flow happening, and how it felt.
Okay, well, there's 2 events I want to focus on, 2 official government pilot events that I had the privilege of being invited to, and 2 very different events they are as well. So there was the ACC Liverpool event, which was a 500-person conference, and then there was the official business pilot event for the Welsh government. So first things first, despite being a United Kingdom, in our sector, we're sort of anything but. The 4 devolved nations are very much going their own way. So the events industry falls under the tourism banner, and tourism is a devolved power to the devolved nations. And therefore, Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland are all going in different directions. And this having
they're all going in the same direction, but taking different routes.
Yeah, okay. They're going in the same direction. Well, actually, no, they're not actually. Yes, to a point in England and Scotland's case, but very different speeds. Wales, which I'll come on to in a minute, are in a terrible situation. But let's talk about the Liverpool one first. So the Liverpool event was the official business pilot event of England, and 500 people. Now, the only thing we had to do was get a PCR test from the clinic or wherever the day before the event. In my case, because I went up to Liverpool in the morning from Surrey, there was the option to have that test conducted in the morning in the neighbouring exhibition centre. And then we had to have a test, I think, 3 days after the event, just to double check that we hadn't, picked it up or anything like that. And it was officially released only last week that actually 0 positive cases were reported. But the most fascinating thing about that pilot event, and I spoke to the scientists who were in charge of it, was it was completely and utterly normal. There was no COVID mitigation measures in place at all. And there was a very good reason for that. We had a media briefing, and I was the only one who actually bothered to ask any questions of these scientists, because there are some inconsistencies there for sure. But the scientists at Liverpool, SAID scientists, part of the Uni of Liverpool, made it clear that they wanted us to act naturally, no artificial action. So we were encouraged to shake hands and give each other cuddles and move around. And it was a very typical event. So we arrived, went through the security gate, had my bag checked, just like the good old days, into the reception where the canapes came around, and it was just, mingling with old friends. And then we were sort of gathered together in the auditorium, so not in the auditorium, in the breakout space, where we were invited to then file through to the auditorium. So if you've been to ACC Liverpool, it holds about, I think, 1,000 people, but 500 of us were there. So we filed into the auditorium, took our seats, and the conference kind of went on the way. I mean, what the conference was is irrelevant. And then we all came back out after that. There was, more canapes and vol au vents came out. Then the lagers came out, and the prosecco. So we're back in business. And then everyone filed back into the auditorium for some entertainment. A comedian was on, and then we left. It was as straightforward as that, and the reason was that the scientists wanted to just observe our behavior, how we behaved, and that was the important lesson to come out of that. The pilot was at no point designed to analyze how we run events. Our capacity of event management was never in doubt, never in question. It was, right, actually, how do people actually move around a conference? Is there all elbows and all of that? And, how easy are bottlenecks to control and things like that? Now, ACC Liverpool, if you've been there, is a very contemporary modern venue with plenty of space and multiple exits and entrances and all of that. It's quite easy to manage any sort of event in a venue like that. How those lessons will carry over to, older venues or smaller venues remains to be seen. And I did ask that question of them, and I got the sort of reply that made my first reaction to the response I got, which was just a grin and don't worry, they'll carry over, was, I think these pilots are just for show. That I think that actually they know what they're doing, and all they're doing is hosting these events to be able to point back to something later on to say, look what we did.
Did you to attend? Did you have to have had the 2 jabs?
No, as I said, there was no requirement for vaccine at that point. We had to have the PCR test the day before.
Okay.
Afterwards. So it was
all right. Let's move on. Because tell us about the other one.
So the Wales one, different situation. Only 90 of us were invited, broken into 3 groups of 30, and we had to follow social distancing strictly, and we had to wear masks throughout the entire event unless we were seated in our little session. So we were broken into 3 groups, and I'm going to be honest, it was a horrible experience and also unmanageable. And even the Welsh authorities who were there and the venue teams were vocal in their distaste for the situation, saying this is not financially sustainable for us to run this. And the tragedy with Wales is they don't have a plan. Only this week did they allow outdoor events to resume, but there's no roadmap plan for Wales. We're having events return indoors. And as a result, venues there are currently losing business to English venues hand over fist. They're in a terrible situation. Will they follow the Scotland model, which is regionalised tiers, which even at its lowest, level 0, only permits events for up to 500 people? Or will it go the England model, which is 21st of June, or it might be a month later, who knows, full chat, no restrictions, back to business? That's the differences between the nations. The Welsh event was sad in a way, actually.
It's hard work, especially wearing the mask. So let me ask, what are you hearing? And I'm asking everyone on the line as well, that if anyone's got some comments, please, if you've got any insights, let us know. You won't be quoted on it, just put it into the chat. But I'm looking at okay, live events happening in the UK, live events happening across Europe, international events, are you hearing, what are you hearing in the marketplace? I know you deal with a lot of agencies, you deal with the associations,
I think
I mean,
everyone.
our members, sorry, let me finish. Our members generally saying, we're very much focused on, for the next 12 months at least, UK events. I'm keen to hear of anyone yet planning a big event overseas, if it's in Europe or internationally, or what. But what are you hearing as that you feel that this stuff's going to start to unfold?
I mean, to say that mixed messages would be an understatement. It really varies region to region. Here in the UK, I'm hearing domestic. International travel is just not on the agenda. Inbound is not on the agenda yet. 2022 is all I'm hearing there. I was hosting an event with IBTM yesterday, and we with the Italian Tourist Board, and they are getting ready. It's early July. They want tourists and business tourism back in. They've already got some American congresses coming in the summer, which I found quite not shocking. Shocking is the wrong word. Surprising.
Yeah.
And they have to have the strict testing. They have to test before and after they get on planes and all that sort of stuff. But certainly in Italy there's an appetite for the return to live, and in America they're cracking on. I mean, Vegas was running a huge event this week, and there's chat of other big shows happening in around various locations in the US as well. So I think they're like sheep, aren't they? When they see one, they'll all want to be at it. But yeah, it's a real mixed bag. I think generally across Europe, it's pretty much domestic focus. Asia and the US far more aggressive to cracking on with international.
I mean, it's interesting. You go back to sort of the G7 summit as a sort of example that, here we have, let's call the G7 a massive global organization. And they rightly say, we have to come together, because it's the only way we can really do business. We can't continue doing virtual meetings and stuff like that. We get some stuff done, but there's a lot of stuff that they probably aren't getting done.
Yeah.
That maybe that is how these meet.
Well,
might not be so often, but they still will need to happen.
I think they do, and I think, look, this is what we were talking about earlier. The marketplace has various options now to suit whatever needs you have. Whereas before you had to maybe just go a certain way. Oh, why are you doing live? Well, we always did it that way. You now have virtual there as another weapon in the arsenal if you need it. It's the same with hybrid. It's there, but don't try and give your delegates that sort of those false ideas of what the objectives might be. At the end of the day, what are your objectives? Well, you know what they are. You've established those. What's the best way to achieve them? Live will always be a different experience, and it doesn't have to be a better or worse. It will always be different. I'll just read a quick quote that we spotted earlier in The Guardian. It said, Saudi Arabia was deeply disappointed when its G20 summit last year took place online, and G7 has always been regarded as a fireside chat which would lose its impact and worth if done remotely. And that's telling. And we've got COP26 this year as well. Same thing. People need to be there in live to discuss it. That matters. That would not work online. But that's the big stuff. Small stuff can work as well. But again, it just comes down to what the objectives are. We've got so many options now. It just needs a little bit of nous to be able to work out what best suits your needs. Live will always matter. And I would just say, quick thing. I am a big fan of live. Obviously, live does matter. But I always want people to just remember the economic benefit that your event will bring to the destination you choose. So even if we're just looking at it domestically, Liverpool is the example I'm going to use because I've got the numbers off the top of my head. Before COVID, 38,000 jobs were supported in Liverpool owed to the events industry. The events industry brought £3.3 billion annually in economic benefit, and events businesses contributed 42% of all the business rates that Liverpool drew in annually. That's how important our sector is to regenerating these regional economies. It's so important. Just a quick one. They used to be manufacturing hubs, but all those steel warehouses and the car plants and all of that are now gone. Okay. the people are still there, and they're relying on our industry. We regenerate, and you look at every regeneration project around the country, particularly from Birmingham up to the north, and there's an events venue at the centre of them all. That's how important we are.
So this moves to a very interesting quote, isn't it? So where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And I think we've definitely been through a crisis. We're still at the sort of tail end of it, but we're starting to find our feet now and understand it a bit more. So, and the question is this, the kick-ass moment that our industry needed? And how quickly have things evolved over the past 12 months? I see, I spout about this quite a bit now. I see the new heading as engagement marketing, not event marketing, because I think it is much more about an integrated campaigns, approaches, more strategic, and a much more integrated approach across numerous disciplines. And I think, we'll basically have an opportunity to get a bigger share of the purse from a general marketing to create this sort of more live, integrated, experiential campaigns, both internally and externally, and not just consumer goods, but business as well.
Yeah, I think there's been a great filtering. I want to call it the great filtering, because before COVID, and don't forget, I haven't just got I've got one foot on the kind of conference and the engagement side, what we're talking about here, but I've also got my other foot in the exhibitions industry, which is a completely different beast, serving a completely different market, and really has actually, apart from cross-pollination of some suppliers, very little in common. But one thing I've learned from this pandemic is that as an industry, we are so big and diverse. We did not know who each other were. And that meant we were having about 10 different conversations in 20 different places, or we were all having the same conversation in different places and not joining ourselves up together. And frankly, it was just a bit of a mess. But I think now we have all identified who each other are. We know which circles we need to be talking into steering the conversations. And there are big topics now that have been on the periphery for a few years, which are now at the top of the agenda, chief among which is sustainability. And Absolutely. This is something that I'm sure all of the audience here today will be very au fait with. Sustainability matters, and we're not just talking about environmental credentials and that the carbon impact, but as businesses, what are we doing to give back and to grow? Because at the end of the day, that's where we're going. But even on the environmental matters, it's such an important aspect. Now we're able to have the conversations. We know who to have the conversations with. We know who needs to be in on that conversation. So in that sense, this has been the reset button we really needed. It's obviously just a shame we did have to lose businesses and individuals, and let's hope they land on their feet soon enough. But yeah, the great reset, I think, has been a long time coming. And like you say, we can't waste this crisis. We have to use it for good.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenging time, but again, like I said, there's great opportunities. Talking to our members, one of their challenges is, I was going to say keeping ahead of the curve, but in reality, it is keeping up with the curve, because their knowledge, they need to shift from being experts in events and event management to all of a sudden being seen as the experts in virtual technology and everything else, which nobody had a clue about really 18, 24 months ago. Now seen as the experts in that, and there's been a lot of work, and interesting enough, majority of people have been delivering nearly 100% more events, at least 50% more events than they were live. So, massive amount of events, which is still in the pipeline because they're still delivering those. But now they've got to upskill and get the knowledge and the supply chain to move it into this hybrid world. What does that look like? Is it going to be live and streamed virtually like the TV productions? Is it going to be capturing content and post-production, release and delivery? Of course, all these things are options and different. And it's, again, getting that knowledge together around that.
There's the word of the age, which is certainly being used in the exhibition community, is omni-channel. And essentially, an exhibition would take place 2 days a year, and everything was building up to that show day, and then show day comes and goes, and that's it. It all kind of goes quiet, and then the cycle begins again. They're now the drive is that, okay, well, I'm doing the fashion show, for example. I have a community of 8,000 people who come every year to my 2-day show. They don't hear from me or see me for 2 years, for a whole year, until those 2 days. So how am I going to engage that audience throughout the course of the year? So all these smaller satellite events are going to pop up, whether they're casual Zoom roundtables like this, or perhaps they're slightly more formalized webinars with production quality. Are they content sessions, engagement sessions? There's a whole sort of drive towards that, and that's essentially where I think the marketplace is going. It's a drive towards that more 24/7 community spirit. And there's a fun irony here, because obviously, for those of you that don't know Mash Media, not only are we magazine publishers, we've got 6 magazines, we're also event organizers. So we run shows like Confex, the publishing show, event production show, and some others as well, which I can't remember because I'm clearly on top of my game. And obviously I know publishers and I know event organizers, and all the event organizers I speak to are now turning around and saying, right, we're going to get into publishing. We need to start creating all these content channels to push our shows out. Great. And now I'm speaking to publishers and they're all saying, right, I need to get into events and do that. And it's like publishing and events is just becoming one and the same. And it's just about having that content out there. Because if you don't do it, and someone else does, doesn't matter if your big event is a big annual occasion just for 3 days a year. If someone else moves into your field and starts providing content on a more daily or weekly basis, that's just going to snowball. And if it's good enough, it'll attract the audience. So you can't be caught napping, because you don't want to lose that community. Yeah. So I think, a more holistic approach, and
it's like I said, though, it's about engagement, not about the specifics of it just being a live event. It becomes a campaign, an engagement of touching people, communicating with people, whether small groups, large groups. It's looking at what you did, what you've done, what you're going to be doing, and then filtering all of that through and working out what the new strategies should be.
Yeah, but the thing is that's the fun part.
It's exciting.
There are no rules in that sense anymore. You can do what you like. Just a quick analogy: for 200 years, the only way you could get your news was through a printed newspaper, and that endured right up until those ancient days of the late 1990s. And now, everyone's saying, "Oh, print is dead," blah blah blah. No such thing is it dead. What you have is an audience spread out over a much wider demographic. So different demographics want the same content in different formats. So yes, there's still an audience for print, but you can also view your content online, or you can wait for the TV news bulletin, or you can find it on social media. The audience is still there. You've just got to cater for all these different platforms in which they want to consume it. And it's going to be the same with events. You need to be able to sort of say, well, yes, I have a social media presence, and that's where you're going to get that sort of content. Yes, we have a website, and we're going to put regular updates and knowledge exchange there for you to access if you need, blah, blah, blah. Here's the signature event. That's when the community comes together. Every component has a role to play. So we just need to get rid of this sort of either or rhetoric that I think, maybe holds us back in a decade gone by, I think.
Using that analysis has just made me think, Martin, that it's flipping the ownership. So historically, the newspaper owned the news and managed that. This is what you're going to read. This is how you're going to get it. This is it. This is the news. To now, the ownership has flipped to the reader, or the whoever's going to take it on board. And this is where I get my news. I want to hear, I want to do it this way. I'm at the center of this universe, not being fed information. And to a certain extent, that fits with our attendees for our events, or whether it's our employees, our customers, whoever we're trying to communicate with. We've got to adapt to what they want, find out what they want and need and how they want to receive stuff, and focus on that process instead of saying, here's the information we want to
That's it. The only word of caution we hear about, forgive me, I despise buzzwords, but I'm going to use the word Netflixification, if you'll grant me that liberty, where we have this sort of on-demand life now, and kids don't watch TV in the traditional sense. They don't sit and flick through the Radio Times, which is a bit sad, because this is my thing. I used to like flicking channels, and I don't know what I'm going to find. I don't know what I'm going to learn about next, and I quite like to just flick through the channels now and again. Oh, there's Michael Palin and his pastel jacket on a train going through Cumbria. I might find that interesting, so I'll sit and watch. Whereas if I go through Netflix, I'm actually picking and choosing what do I want to learn about. I'm almost tunnel visioning myself. That's what I like and that's what I want. Where's the chance encounter? I worked in motorsport for 13 years purely as a result of falling in love with it by accidentally flicking the channel onto a Grand Prix when I was a kid in the late 80s. Had I not flicked the channel and seen Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost racing each other in Japan, I may not have stumbled across another moment that captivated me. And that was a chance occasion, and it defined my early working life. So I'm just always a little bit itchy about it, but it's just something I think people should take note of.
No, and that's a really, again, I take the snippets of what you said there and filter them in my little bit of grey matter that's still working. But it's very much that thing of that's the power of live, isn't it? And it's really hard to measure. So it's the old advertising thing. I spent 100,000 in advertising, 50 grand was great. 50 grand was a waste of money. I just wish I knew which 50 grand was great. And the thing about live is that opportunity for those sidebar conversations, those networkings, that the people meeting and coming together, building those relationships. They're so hard to equate, they're so hard to measure, so hard to capture, and bring them into one. Guys, any questions? Please chuck us something into chat if you have. I want to go back to the supply chain, Martin, because I think potentially this, I might be over-egging it, I don't know, but it could be a massive issue. Again, everybody out there, I don't know if anyone's seen this already, but like I said earlier in the middle of the conversation, majority of our members have been extremely busy. They're delivering more events online than they were live events. They're going now through some of this transition. Generally, the view is it is going to be 2022 before we start delivering live. Maybe some things happening small in the autumn, but learning new skills. The landscape of the corporate events, Prof, has changed enormously and is changing and evolving. Is the supply chain ready?
That's a very good question. I'm afraid. When I say I'm afraid, I just don't have an answer. It's like my opinion on this evolves with the news. It's like there's a pendulum swinging at the moment. One day, 21st of June is looking good. There's hope. Then the next day it's delayed by a month. This question sort of provokes the same response in me. Is the supply chain ready for the evolving needs of the corporate? Well, let me put it this way. I bloody hope so. Because they should be engaging. Corporates obviously have to identify their pain points, and they need to know what they can and can't do. Where do they need help? We need to be better at communicating with each other. Although obviously we know corporates are the event buyer, you are the client, the end user. You're all servicing different sectors. Please engage with the events industry itself, with the agencies, with the suppliers, whoever it is you're dealing with, to have these open conversations. I think we've all learned that just by having these casual conversations and bringing people in early, we can establish what we need. I was speaking to someone who runs a speaker agency this morning of quite prominence. Richard, you'll know him, I'm sure. And he was saying that I'm fed up with getting calls the day before saying, oh, yeah, well, we've got an hour slot for the speaker. So who can you provide? When he's saying, well, hang on a minute. If you want a high profile speaker, you've almost got to design the event around them, because you've only done one, but this speaker may have done about 50 over the last few months. They know, and they have, I get this. I've been on some terrible, produced events and some brilliant ones as well. But I just been, get parachuted in without having any input in the event process. Bring people in. That's just like a micro example, but you've got to bring people in early. Because we haven't found our feet yet. The industry in its new, different, whatever you want to call it, hasn't found its head. The only way it's going to do that, or certainly the only way we can expedite that, is by communicating with as many stakeholders as possible as early as we can.
Yeah, well, and that again goes back to when we look at virtual, or from a TV production style point of view, is you really start to see the expertise in the anchors and the presenters, and their skills are far, far greater than our executive skills in presenting.
Exactly.
And yes, they can do it on a stage to 100 or 200 or 1,000 people, and they can point at the PowerPoint behind them, and they can walk up and down the stage and wave their hands around. But all of a sudden, you put them in a real sort of production studio, or when there's been no audience to interact with. In fact, people found that very difficult. Or when you've got camera 3, camera 2, screens here, and you've got a virtual piece of technology to use, they've sort of fallen.
I've done it. I did it with Charlotte at Pure Events. We hired a studio. I hosted her event. It was fantastic. I've done a few of those studio ones now, and I love it. There's a real buzz. It is, through all intents and purposes, a TV show. There is no difference. It is exactly that. And you are looking for the camera. The camera you need to be looking at has got the red light on it, so you know where to go. It's a proper setup. And what I do hope is that we're not going to try to think to ourselves, oh, virtual is virtual, and therefore we have Zoom for free and that will do. No, you respect your delegates. They're going to want a quality experience as well. And honestly, getting in the studio and spending the proper money on the proper experience makes a heck of a difference.
Well, and very down to basics, speaker training. You've got these people that you're going to put in front of the camera representing your business, your brand, and everything else. And
yeah, that's it. Don't forget that one.
They're clinging on to the lectern, reading notes from an A4 piece of paper, like I would. But I think and of course, they don't think they need to do this.
That's right.
I'm a senior executive of an organization. So again, I think that's the sort of massive learning going back into the sector. Let me just see if there's anything in the question box. But Martin, thank you very much indeed for your intel and insight. Anything you want to sort of really sort of wrap up and finish on? Sort of comment. I'm thinking about, again, what are you hearing from the rest of this year, live events? I can see public consumer stuff happening. I heard you can't get a Portaloo in August for all the festivals and conferences that are booked in, but
there's going to be a strain on the supply chain. I think that's certain. I think the way I see it, I don't want to put too much emphasis on the 21st of June as this sort of, glowing date on the calendar. Whether we're unlocked and unleashed on that date or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later doesn't really make a difference right now. You can still run events at restricted capacity with mitigations today if you want. The way I see it, from now until September, October, if you're into your football, is like the pre-season. I think we're in the pre-season friendlies before the season sort of kicks off towards the autumn. It will take some braver brands to maybe go big early before then. But once we've had a few bigger events, confidence will begin to rebuild quickly. But I think in the meantime, you've got to just stay engaged with your community. You've got to keep them abreast of whatever it is you do. If we are delayed, seriously, it's not the end of the world. I think the supply chain is holding on. But at the end of the day, you've got to make those inquiries now. If you're planning on going ahead in September or October, you've got to get those calls in now. There's a lot of, and I've got lots of data on this, there's a lot of inquiries, there's a lot of bookings, but there are not many signed contracts. So everyone just needs to understand flexibility, and don't be afraid to call out. Let me know any venues or suppliers who really are playing silly buggers with contracts and not being flexible on T's and C's. Let me know. Private.
We'll chase them down. We'll hound them. Okay, Martin. And I think the other thing on my part is again, what I'm sort of learning from this and would share with our members is, as part of your contracting or buying and everything else, think about like terms of engagement, terms of agreement of your supply chain, that they can guarantee you the people to deliver. So you might want a couple of key personnel who are on your account and running your event for you, assigned now, not that they're just taking the piece of business and thinking, right, now let's work out how we deliver this. And some warranties from the venues and stuff like that, about the quality of service that they're going to deliver. Just it keeps the pressure on them. So it sounds awful, but if they can't get the staff, that's not necessarily your fault. And it's the state of the industry. But you have to, at the end of the day, then come down to looking after number one on your business, and that's your responsibility. And it's where you as the corporate event prof will be held accountable within your organization if the event falls on its face for some reason or other. On that note, Martin, I want to say a big thank you, as always. It was great having a chat with you. Look forward to catching up to you, and we'll sort of show my face at Convex a couple of weeks' time. And hopefully we'll have our ski trip in
yes
next year.
Yeah, let's
get back to those. Yeah,
well, I'm seeing Chetan tomorrow if you're going to be there. So
no, I'm not. I'm blocked out of that because he's so busy. Full house with his group.
So. Oh, is he? So he didn't make the.
I didn't make the cut. But no, great. Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you everybody for joining. I hope you found that useful.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.